next panel here, we have Jim Swearingen and Stephen Geddes, and we're going to talk about kind of the early days of Star Wars at Kenner. I always want to say the early days at Kenner, but Kenner was doing a whole bunch of other stuff before Star Wars came along. I think we've kind of had the intro on Jim, and we know a bit about who he is and the kind of pre-production work he did. Stephen, you were a sculptor mostly, and you started out, did you start your career at Kenner like that?
I started my toy career at Kenner. I had responded to a listing that had been posted with employment agent that had announced an opening for a senior toy sculptor with a toy company located near Cincinnati, Ohio. And so I applied and found out that it was Kenner Products in the middle of Cincinnati, Ohio. And so I went through a couple of audition pieces for the head of sculpting, John Gardner.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I was basically, it was the listing was for a senior toy sculptor, and I wasn't a senior toy sculptor. I was a sculptor. That was about it. And so the first audition piece that I had to do for them was it was a baby doll head, and I had to do it in wax. And the only wax that I had at my disposal was basically Victory Brown foundry wax. So the first piece that I did for John was totally underwhelming, and so he said, "I'd like to have you do another audition piece." You know, he says, "Come up to Cincinnati." I was living in Kentucky at the time, and so he said, "I'll give you the wax. I'll give you a waxer. I'll give you a handful of tools, you know, to work with and everything." So I kind of sweat bullets, like getting this baby doll head remodeled and everything, and then eventually got hired.
So you hadn't intended to go into toy sculpting, it just the opportunity came up.
Yeah, I had gone to graduate school to basically teach in college.
Okay.
And at the time I had been working for the Kentucky Arts Commission. And as an artist in the schools, different high schools. And the second year that I was ending my second year as an artist in the schools, and the people from the state, it was a state arts program, and they had come up to Somerset to interview me, do my exit interview basically, and kind of evaluate the program. And so it was kind of away from Frankfurt down to Somerset, and it was late afternoon, and so my wife said to them, "Would you like to stay for dinner?" And my contact said, "Well, we'd love to, but we've got a date to go with some friends and see this movie, Star Wars." And that was kind of the first I knew of it, and so it was a real revelation when this job showed up, and
Perfect time to start.
well, everything had been in turmoil for us that summer, because our lease was out and we had to move back to Wisconsin. And so finally, the guy from the employment agency calls me up, and he says, "Okay," he says, "now look, have you seen Star Wars yet?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And he says, "Well, go see it, because Kenner just got the movie rights to this movie." And so that night, my wife and I drove down to the next town and went into the movies. And by the time that they were in the cantina, I looked at that and I thought, "Oh, I got to work for these people. That job is mine."
I bet. Jim, maybe you know more. Was there a bit of a hiring spree kind of as a result of Star Wars once it really got popular? And
Probably, yeah. Well, we probably did, especially people like sculptors,
Yeah.
because a lot of the product that Kenner did, like Easy Bake Oven and Spirograph, required engineering and some designers. But we had done Baby Alive. That's why you had to do it, Baby Head. But so yeah, we probably in areas where we were lean.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would have gone for to staff up, and I think they kept staffing up as things went along, especially in that area, because it took a whole different set of skills that we didn't have a lot of. I mean,
I think they were paying a lot of money to people who had been ex Mattel sculptors to do it out in California and then send it back. And
it's cheaper to. Sorry, it's cheaper to have them in-house than do freelance.
Yeah.
It was definitely
I've
cheaper.
seen some of the paperwork from outside sculptors.
But they weren't any more talented. They may have been less. They would have been on staff, but we did get healthcare and stuff. So
yeah,
so,
Definitely.
but we did. Yeah, they would have. They hired some really fantastic sculptors, and I have to say. Stephen has been to, this is his second event with Seeing Fans. And I'm really pleased because I kind of introduced him. He and Nancy Flanagan were in Nashville. And I was really pleased to see what kind of reaction fans and collectors had meeting sculptors, because they did a lot of hands-on stuff, and it was really gratifying for me to see them, bringing Dagobah play sets to Steve to have him sign them and stuff, because it's like the background actors. People don't see them, but when they come to events, people want to meet them. All the character actors that were in the backgrounds, the guys in the cantina show up at events, and people are like. There are people that do squid faces, their thing, or Akbar or the calamari. So he's kind of the calamari of sculpting.
I actually have two other arms under here.
So I'd like to go back, Jim, that day when you visited ILM and you mentioned it in your presentation there. I think for like everybody here, that is would be the most amazing thing ever. And it's really cool that you were, as you say, kind of like a sci-fi geek and actually, I guess, appreciated that day. I know that at that time, like they were kind of behind on a lot of the visual effects and stuff like that. Was it John Dykstra that you met there, or?
Yeah, just in passing.
Oh, okay.
That scene at the beginning of the toys that made us.
Yeah.
That actually happened. That's Charlie Lippincott was the marketing guy, and the guy that plays me. That's a guy acting in New York. We did go by, and he said, "This is Jim Swearingen. He's going to do that." That actually happened. So it was very cool to walk down the hall and see the X-wing models and the Death Star and TIE fighters. So I got to see all that stuff and meet a few of those people as we got in, and introduced to many more people than I can remember. But yeah, it was, I was starstruck. It was.
Well, and you showed those black and white pictures that you had along with the script. Had you seen any ships or vehicles before that point?
We had a snapshot of an X-wing and a TIE fighter, and I think a Millennium Falcon. The ones that were on the early packaging, there may be some back there.
Yeah.
There's a shot of an X-wing and a TIE fighter.
Yeah.
And we had a snapshot of kind of an odd angle of the Millennium Falcon, but that's what we started with. And that's why I was out there. Is to get more information, because they were not prepared for what we needed.
Yeah.
Like ideally, I would have gone in and said I need a top and a bottom and a side and all the views, but all they had were like action shots.
Yeah.
So I got to glean all that and bring it back. And the details like those, on my table, there's some reproductions of Joe Johnston's sketches.
Yes, yeah.
It would give us an idea of what things were, what looked like. And again, I wasn't taking pictures in the studio, but to see the real X-Wings and stuff was way cool. It was like, whoa, all that. I think the first Death Star, one of the Death Stars ended up, Gus Lopez, the big collector. I think he has a Death Star that was in the trash somewhere.
Yeah, I think he's got it in his entryway, I think, or something.
So he'd found it by chance. So, yeah, it really was cool to be in there and, to go to the cantina when I went with the marketing guys. There's people, dressed up in costumes having lunch. It's like, takes it out of reality. So,
yeah, I guess it's kind of weird for us to think of a time where you wouldn't know what an X-Wing or a TIE fighter looked like, right? From reading the script or what we're so used to them now, obviously. But you wouldn't know until you got to actually see something physical, what it was really like.
They were working on special effects right up to that May 1st, practically.
Were people rushing around and like just very...
Well, I didn't see any of them. They were. Oh, okay. I'm sure there were people slaving over editing machines, which, again, it was all film. They're cutting and pasting the thing together, and it's not. They can't just manipulate it with a keyboard. They're like, they'd chop the thing and stick it together. And if you've ever done film, it's a whole different process now than then. So. Yeah.
So Bernie Loomis, you mentioned him. He was he CEO at the time of president of Kenner. So like that was a pretty big risk he took. Was he known to be the risk taker?
Yeah, he was. Yeah. He did. He did Baby Alive, the doll that eats and poops, which is that's a pretty big step, So.
Yeah.
We would make presentations periodically. We were owned by General Mills, the cereal company, and we would periodically present to them different ideas. And at the same time that they presented Baby Alive, they did Mrs. Jones, which was the doll that got pregnant. And the story is that the executives at General Mills said you can have one, but not both. So they picked the right one, did Baby Alive.
They picked Poop and Pee over?
Yeah. But that's a big risk. A big risk. Yeah. And Star Wars was a risk because they didn't know for sure. When you see interviews with the actors, there are quite a few actors that go, we didn't know. It seemed kind of corny to us. And they had not, and that's one of the things that the sculptors were charged with not making the figures look too much like the people in the movie, because there was a concern by the people in the movie that if it bombed, they didn't want to have somebody coming up to them with their doll and saying, "Hey, do you remember this?" So they took some effort to make them look kind of like the character, but not like the actor.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And when you guys decided to go 3 3/4 inches, like, did you realize how that would affect the toy industry basically for the next couple of decades, or it was just a decision that had to be made?
Well, we did the figure small because at least I pitched it as the heroes of the movie were the X-Wing and TIE Fighter, not all the dolls or the figurines or whatever they used to call them. But I wanted to be able to do the dogfight. Yeah. Just looking back at Roy Rogers' Stagecoach, I wanted to be able to take the action I saw in the movie and put it in the hands of the kids, because that's how I would have played with it. So we needed small figures, but the 3 3/4 inch scale was kind of nebulous at that point in time.
Yeah. I guess there weren't a lot of vehicles for other other toys like for well, I guess GI Joe and stuff had stuff for the 12-inch toys, but
Yeah, but making an X-wing big enough to.
and huge, yeah, because it really ended up changing everything for the next few lines. Like everyone was doing that scale, right?
Yeah, Battlestar Galactica was done at, the figures are all really tiny because they were doing the same thing. They didn't really care about the characters. They wanted the ships.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, and it was especially challenging for the sculptors to do what they could at that scale.
Yeah.
Because the doll head's this big, and you do these figures. They were.
Yeah, I get versus a 12-inch doll. Yeah.
Steve should talk to it. It's much more complicated than you realize. You just don't sculpt a figure. There's a whole lot that goes into the different materials and the.
Well, yeah, I'd love to hear about that. Like just your process, Stephen, when you're sculpting. Let's talk about a figure and just like what are the steps that you go through on that.
Originally, basically, there was a process of cannibalization that took place as the movies progressed and as the line progressed, so that a lot of the original figures don't exist anymore. They got turned into something else. The walrus head got turned into somebody from the Empire Strikes Back. I was telling somebody earlier that anybody tries to sell you the original wax of the 3 3/4 inch C-3PO, they're selling you a swampland in Florida, because I remember taking that C-3PO and turning it into the sandcrawler droid. That for like I think it's like 1.5 seconds. When they get dumped into that thing, it turns and goes. And I remember playing that over and over and over on the video. Try to pick up the characteristics of the head. But typically, originally, a figure would be cast from a generic figure or a mold from a previous figure in the toy wax. And then we would you'd simply start cutting or adding on wax with the waxing pen.
Yep.
So that it was kind of a combination of modeling and carving. You add material and then you'd carve it down, and then you'd using rifflers, which are just very small files, and loop tools to polish and John Gardner, the fellow that hired me, who ran the department at that time, he would use the front of the face of a small, very tiny piece of 400 grit, silicon carbide paper, and then he'd flip it over and he'd use the back to polish it, and then he'd finally polish it with a piece of toilet paper. So it almost turned into a Zen activity after a while. You get it down to that point, and then there's a little pinhole, and you got to fill it. So then you got to fill it with this waxer, and then you got a blob of wax, and you got to start over again. Eventually, what they started doing especially by the third movie, I guess because the actors felt it was safe enough. We had to start getting them to look like the characters.
Yeah, you see the Return of the Jedi line is much more detailed in the faces of both the alien and human creatures.
Oh, yeah. And Princess Leia was a killer.
Mm-hmm.
There was one figure, I think it was from the third movie, that they went through just about every sculptor and the staff.
Oh, really?
And I guess Carrie didn't like any of it, or her agent or whatever. Yeah. And so finally, they just gave up and sent the figure with the head out to Joyce Christopher. And there were two Joyces in California, Joyce Christopher and Joyce Clark, who had done work for Mattel for years. They were legendary, and they were the go-to people. You wanted to they did Barbies, you
Yeah.
know, and all that. And if you wanted it to be pretty and pristine,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and all that, it went out to the Joyces.
Oh, okay.
You know, and so then I could, you know, if I couldn't do Princess Leia, then I go back to ugly stuff, which was my forte. I did warts and wrinkles and scales and stuff like that. Really, you know, I like doing that a lot.
Well, as a sculptor, would you be responsible for any accessories and weapons too, or was that?
Well, it depended on the accessory. Guns and things like that were usually done by the people in the pattern shop,
Okay.
which was another group of really skilled people. Has anybody seen? You must have seen pictures of the original pattern that they did for the Millennium Falcon. I mean,
Is that the wood one? Or-
yeah.
Yeah, I've seen pictures.
I mean, I came from a wood carving background, wood sculpture. And I went down there and, you know, first time I went down to the wood shop and the Millennium Falcon pattern was, you know, kind of sitting there leaning against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I almost wept.
Yeah.
The land, which is, you know, like the Millennium Falcon was basically, it parted on a flat plane. So you had the top and you had the bottom. And for the land on that pattern that they built the pattern on, they had two pieces of like 2.5-inch thick slabs of Honduras mahogany that they had milled down to dead flat. And then they built the Millennium Falcon out of cherry, you know, like grade A cherry.
Yeah.
I mean, and then all the ribs and the rivets and everything were done in styrene, so it was white. You know, it's an amazing piece.
And so, Jim, is that kind of the department where your work would go from like if you're doing the preliminary and conceptual designs, and you said, and then it goes to production, it's kind of their problem. Like, what's that step after you?
That step, that was actually a step after the design engineers that do the production design. Then it went to the tooling and pattern making people. And that Millennium Falcon pattern is 2-up. So you know what so done 2-up, it's really the 77 technology, because it was done 2-up, it went to the Orient, and then it was cut. They used a pantograph to pantograph it down to full size in the steel with shrink and stuff added in it. But yeah, that pattern, all the patterns, the X-Wing TIE Fighter and the Millennium Falcon were all done 2-up. So they were all these beautiful sculptures. And the fellows that did that work are, you know, as talented as the sculptor, almost as talented as sculptors.
No, they were talented.
They
were good.
They were amazing. There's a few of them still around, I think. So, but they built some amazing patterns, and they did it for a lot of toys. That some of them, the X-Wing, because of their scale, were done 2-up. Some of it was done 1-to-1 with shrink added. That's the other thing that the sculptors had to do, was figure out shrink, because the materials for the bodies and the heads were different. You had vinyl that shrank.
Yeah.
And had to go through processes, and the bodies shrank at different rates. So you have to make sure that by the time you got them together, that the figure looked like it was supposed to at the beginning of the process. There, sorry, I'm diverting, but
That's great.
the big head, small head Han Solo,
Yeah.
probably, my conjecture is that we hired a new manufacturer in the Orient, and I think what they might have done is taken an existing head
Mm-hmm.
and made a mold, and then from production, not from a wax, not from a one with shrink, and that
From an actual
they
figure.
may have pantographed it up or down or something, so that the heads were not they were the wrong scale.
Mhm.
They didn't come back and say, "Hey, we need a new hard copy."
Oh, okay.
we're going to do it ourselves. And
Yeah.
that's why you ended up with big heads, little heads, because they probably in the process didn't want to go all the way back and say, hey, we need a hard copy or whatever from our stuff. So,
Curious things would happen sometimes once it got to the tooling. The most embarrassing figure that I remember working on was the Cloud City Lando.
Yeah.
Because I remember sculpting it, and when it came back as a product, he's got a very the head is compressed. There's not enough back of the head.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think what happened was the two faces of the mold simply got planed down too much, so that you kind of look like Zippy the Pinhead. But
Well, that's interesting to talk about because us collectors are all about variants and paint variants, or the tiniest difference in figures. So Lando, for instance, that Lando, there is Smiling Lando that actually has the mouth paint, and then just, I don't know, happy but not too happy Lando without the smile. Did you originally design it with the mouth paint, or do you know why some have and some don't? No.
I don't. Maybe Jim does.
no.
Well, I know, Jim, you've been asked before about things like Farm Boy Luke and different hair colors or different paint apps. And I think collectors always theorize these like weird reasons why they did it. But from an insider, what's your view on why there are all these variations?
Yeah, I understood that I created a controversy when I was at ICC and made a presentation. Somebody asked me why the farm boy had brown hair sometimes and yellow hair. And I said, well, we had a manufacturer that made a mistake, and people were like, "It's a mistake? What you call a variant is usually a mistake," especially in the early figures, because we had to ramp up pretty quickly, and we had manufacturers that we could rely on. We knew them, so they were the first ones, and then you need more figures and more figures. We were using people that we hadn't used before, and usually it would be you'd have a paint spec, there'd be a drawing and there'd be arrows pointing to different things saying what color they were supposed to be. And somebody, it could have been they switched pages from Luke to somebody else or something. But usually it's just a mistake. And at that time, we have 5,000 brown-haired Luke Skywalkers or orange-haired Skywalkers. Yeah. And do you want us to dump them? Or do you want them to be shipped? And the usual answer at that point was ship the things. I don't care what color his hair is, unless it's green or something, that we need them on the shelf. And that's why, collectors get their variants, because we shipped those few. It wouldn't be very many because we had lots of QC people, but one slipped by and it was like, well, because they were pumping out figures by the thousands every day. So it was like, because you see pictures of cartons sitting on the floor and they're being emptied they're not being put on the pegs anymore. They're just like, that's why people have unpunched cards.
Yeah.
It's because they never got on the peg in Toys R Us or somewhere. So just by chance, there's another variant.
Yeah, and just keep selling it. I think like overall the QC from Kenner seems to have been pretty rigid. Like besides those paint variations, it's pretty rare that you find manufacturing error of sometimes you get some short pours or stuff like that, but overall really good quality on the stuff.
Yeah, they had people in, each manufacturer had their QC, and then we had people in Hong Kong, doing a lot of work, a lot of footwork and stuff, getting from place to place. But
had Kenner been manufacturing a lot in Asia up to that point, or was this, like, I know it wasn't probably their first rodeo in doing that, but was manufacturing starting to shift over?
Well, action figures were a new thing. like all the X-Wing TIE fighters
Yeah.
were, or a lot of them, we shipped the tools to Hong Kong. We did some manufacturing here, and
Yeah.
then it went to Hong Kong. But we did a lot of manufacturing of the first X-Wings and TIE fighters and Millennium Falcons in Cincinnati,
Mm-hmm.
in Norwood. So a lot of it was done in-house. But the tools are cut in New York and then brought here
Okay.
because it's cheaper to cut them over there.
Yeah.
So the stuff went back and forth. And we were talking to George the other day. That,
Yeah. And well, yeah, because we'll talk about some of the stuff that was made in Toronto.
yeah, because
as well.
there's videos online. There's lots of videos showing the
Putting the Falcons
manufacturing.
together and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah.
Lots of rows of people with screwdrivers hanging from the above, and they're like,
Yeah.
there was one. This is completely aside. We were manufacturing a thing called Gabigail, which was a doll that had a recording mechanism. So you'd speak to her and then she'd talk back. And I don't know if I should tell it, but there's a line of these dolls going down, and they're all face down on the conveyor belt. And then there's somebody on the line is putting the body on and has a screwdriver, and there was a screw right in her butt. And there was a video of it, and she's like, but she has all these little bodies going down, and there's a screw right in her butt. Yes. But the Millennium Falcon, she didn't have to worry about that. Doesn't have a butt.
No buts.
Well, speaking of butts, actually, Stephen Walrusman was one of your. Was that one of the first products you worked on?
That was the first figure.
Yeah.
The first project I had was the Dianoga.
Okay, for the Death Star playset.
Yeah, and I think, I think I mentioned to someone earlier that was, I think it was a test piece. When John Gardner hired me, when I came down to sign the contract and everything, he picked me up at the airport, and we're driving back into Cincinnati from northern Kentucky, which is where the airport was. So it's a distance. And he's just talking general, and he's talking about Bill Lemon and how he does these figures in cellulose acetate, fully articulated and everything, and he says, yeah, he does them in acetate and he only charges $750 a figure. And I thought, wow, this is the promised land, And I think that he regretted telling me that. And so when I showed up for work the first day, in October, I got the Dianoga. And John had me working on the Dianoga for 6 weeks.
Well, I was going to ask, because in the movie we really only see the eye and a wee bit of the neck.
Yeah.
How did you flesh out the rest of the body there?
I didn't make it up. Tim Effler did.
Okay.
Tim Effler it comes down there and hey, this is the project, and he had the drawings and everything of the Dianoga, and it had the tentacles and everything. And I thought, wow, how did he know that?
Yeah.
And he didn't. He made it up.
Yeah.
I wore away as much texture on that Dianoga just by handling it and sharpening some other area.
Yeah.
But John was going to make sure that I took it seriously, and that I knew that just because it was little did not mean it was insignificant.
Yes. Yeah.
And I thought I was going to lose my mind. 6 weeks. I mean, I had to make a nest. A nest. If you've got a piece like a one-piece sculpture, and it's going to have a top and bottom to the mold. There's going to be a parting line, and with the Dianoga, it had to, walk. It couldn't stay in a plane.
Yeah.
And so the way you did that, the purest way, the John Gardner way, was you made a nest out of plaster, and you would build this little pile of plaster up, and then before it's set, you'd have your wax, and you'd have silicone paste on it, so that it didn't stick. And you would set it down, and before the plaster set, you'd you'd set it the way you wanted it, so that it was basically in the case of the Dianoga, the tentacles would both be the same distance up off the bench top.
Yeah.
You let it set up, and then you'd pull it off of that nest. You'd shear down the sides of the nest so that there was no plaster sticking out beyond what the shadow would be of the wax model.
Okay.
And then you'd take a square, a small engineering square, and a piece of carbon paper, and you'd hold the carbon paper against the wax, and you would run that square along, and that would give you your parting line. And if you had any bumps on the side that caught the carbon paper, you had to draft them so that they wouldn't catch on the mold. And so he decided 6 weeks was a good time for me to learn to do that.
That's a lot of time on one little green guy.
Walrus face was a dream after that. He didn't have pimples.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I connected because he is also known as butt face to a lot of collectors. Well, let's move on to Dagobah then, the Dagobah playset.
Oh yeah.
There's up on the screen. This is actually one I had you autograph for me at the ICCC. So this has become a little famous now for carving the names in. And you had mentioned, I think before, similar to the Dianoga where you had 6 weeks, that part of the reason you did this is because you just had so long to work on the project.
It's ironic in light of what Jim was talking about with the tight deadlines and everything, that would happen. But John Gardner was not to be hurried. He was meticulous, and he was laid back. I mean, he was Dr. California all over. He was just very easygoing and everything. But when it came to working on the piece, he didn't want his staff to be hurried.
Okay, well, that's a good thing.
He had published a 12-week development time for that. And I had it pretty well done. But I knew that, it was going to run out to the 12 weeks. And so, again, with the wax, it was by our standards, it was a fairly large piece.
Yes, yeah.
And so the more you handle it, the more your fingerprints are just going to wear away detail that you've already got on the upper surfaces. So you just sit it there and you just move it around, and you'd see something that needed to be addressed. And I just kept looking, like at the leaves, and I thought, 5 more days, So I thought, that looks kind of like a G around that leaf, So and if there's an E, and you help it along a little bit. And so I ended up doing there it is.
There's Geddes in the kind of doorway.
Yes, and then I put my daughter's name on the back of a lizard and the back of a snake.
I think there's the lizard, and it's Emily.
Yeah, and I thought all of that went fairly well unnoticed. And my daughter, Emily, grew up and went off to, art school in Detroit.
Yeah.
And she had a boyfriend and went home with him one weekend, and meet the folks and everything. And so they go out to a bar, with him and his high school friends and everything, and they're just sitting around the bar talking. And somehow Emily just mentions the fact that her dad worked on all this stuff and everything. Yeah. And the one kid just says, "Oh my God, you're the Emily." And it's like all of a sudden she was, kind of famous. So I was surprised. She came home and told me that, and I thought, wow, somebody really found that?
Yeah, because to the naked eye, it would be pretty hard to just find them.
Yeah, it was. I also I put my wife's name in the leaves somewhere too, but then I really decided to push the limit. and I snuck a self-portrait in between a couple of the roots on the tree in the backside.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that cleared. I didn't think anybody noticed that. And I was at every summer we would have a company picnic down at Old Coney, which is just, like an amusement park down on the river in Cincinnati. And so I had to go to the men's room, and so I was walking back to the building that housed the men's room, and I met Paul Hawk, who ran the model shop. Model shop? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and Paul was this big hulking, imposing guy and everything. I said, "Hey, Paul, how you doing?" He says, "Hey, okay." He says, then he turns around. He says, "Hey, you know what?" He says, "The other day, the guy that's working on the cavity for that Dagobah, swamp plant thing, because they always did preliminary. At that time, they were doing preliminary molds so that they could cast early, prototypes."
Okay.
Down in the model shop.
Yeah.
And he says, the guy's working on that cavity. He says, he calls me over to his bench, and he says, "Look at that cavity. Look right there." He says, "Does that look like a face to you?" And Hawk says, "Face hell. It looks like the son of a bitch that sculpted it."
And did they
it kind of got wiped out.
they kind of rubbed it down a little bit, and
Yeah.
that's funny.
I had hair then, and I had a beard, so it was a little easier to blow.
It was easier to recognize you in the tree.
Yeah.
There. And the other one that we know of, at least anyway, is the Tauntaun tail.
Yeah.
That has
Yeah.
your name on it there. That was another good one to hide stuff on, I guess, eh?
Yep. Yep. I'm not sure it was exactly subversive. It was just kind of pushing the envelope a little bit.
Yeah.
See if anybody.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know who the first, how it got found out, because you didn't really. I mean, you weren't involved in the collecting community.
No, I didn't. I didn't tell anybody.
I know in Engineering and Empire, it's in there, but I remember hearing rumors way back that your daughter's name was in there, but no one really knew where it was.
Oh, yeah.
I guess with the internet now, it all blows up, right? And
Well, Drew Holland, our vice president, actually found one of Emily's names on the wax when he was signing off. He wasn't sure, and the engineer that had to bring it down to his office knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was kind of a nervous fellow anyhow. He was sweating bullets, but then Drew's secretary told him, announced that he had a phone call. So he was on this phone for a while. So he was fairly involved with the phone call. So finally he just takes the paper, signs it, and that was it.
That's cool. You got to work on, because you worked kind of through all three movies, you got to work on quite a lot of figures and creatures and stuff. Do you have a favorite of the ones you worked on?
Oh, probably. I really like the Rancor.
Yeah.
Just because it's so butt ugly.
Well, it's so true to the movie Rancor as well.
Face like a boxcar.
So what kind of, with Star Wars, obviously, Jim, you guys were, running up against deadlines and getting just whatever information Lucasfilm had. By Empire and Return, how early before the movie's release would you be getting stuff from Lucasfilm to start working on them?
Oh, well, on those we got it fairly soon. We had a fair amount of time to work on them.
Yeah.
We didn't know what was going on.
Would you be getting stills and then the Joe Johnson type sketches?
Yeah, usually we get 8x10 glossies, production shots. And we'd just go from there. We'd, get different angles and things like that. But it was kind of a strange thing because we didn't have a script.
Yeah.
We didn't know what was going on. You would just get the photographs, and so it was kind of a strange mindset, because in your mind you kind of almost develop this storyline, what happens next and what's going on and everything. And then you go see the movie and, oh, hell, it's nothing like that. It's just, it had all backwards and everything.
So like when Empire came out, did Kenner employees, did you guys all go to the theater? Did the company organize anything or?
Yeah. I don't
remember.
Yeah,
I was off it by then.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We would go, they'd rent a theater.
Yeah.
And we'd go see the movie.
That must be pretty cool after working on bits and pieces of it to see it all come together.
It was neat. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better intro to the toy world than coming in Kenner when I did,
And after Return of the Jedi, how long did you stay at Kenner and what did you
I stayed at Kenner till 85.
Okay.
And then I decided to freelance, and I still work for Kenner. I worked on things like Jurassic Park and other properties of Kenner, and then I worked for Hasbro and a little bit for those characters from Cleveland. I had it was a good business. Sometimes it was too good because you'd have I don't know if you ever heard about it, but there were times after they moved out of the Kroger building, I'd be juggling like 3 and 4 different jobs at a time with different deadlines, and Bob Moore was my contact at that time. I'd be doing jobs for him, and I'd bring something in, and it would for the first viewing. And I think they would always expect it to be more finished than it was. Yeah. But I wanted them, if they're going to make a change to the thing,
yes,
don't wait until I've got the buttons on the shirt, Yeah. I do a little bit of work yet, for different people. And it just drives me crazy when I just love it, but can you make it 10% bigger? Sure. I just wipe out all the detail. The quilting is gone, and I'll make it 10% bigger. I would tend to leave it rough for the first viewing. And Bob would say, don't worry, he'll get there. Freelancing was a whole nother world. Because like with the 12-week development time,
you didn't get 12
that was
weeks.
history. I remember. Very often when I was doing things for like those characters from Cleveland, they would want it for a Monday meeting, the finished piece.
Yeah.
And so that meant I had to get it out to the DHL terminal at the airport by 3:30 in the afternoon. And so, I'd put a 36-hour workday in before I went to bed.
Yeah.
And that was not what I had in mind when I decided to freelance. I was there was the illusion, and then there was the reality.
Well, thanks a lot, guys. I was going to see, does anyone have any questions for Jim or Steven? Anyone?
Yeah, no math questions, please.
Yeah, can you calculate the shrink for a head, a vinyl head? If I want to be at 1 inch, how much do you have to add to
It depends on the material, but yeah.
vinyl?
I think that was 3%.
Rotocast.
I think that was 3%.
3%.
Yeah, I think so. I still got the
I don't
chart.
know.
I still got the chart. Mike Ledyard, one of the engineers, because he was so frustrated with us sculptors, actually ran off a bunch of copies, a little table of, like, if it's this material, this is what the shrink's going to be, so we would be good and get it the right size.
And that, for someone who knows like absolutely nothing about that sort of stuff, is it shrinking just because it's drying out or because of the molding?
Just because of the molding. It's just like with the wax too. If you pour it in hot, as it cools, it contracts.
Okay. Yeah.
And plastic does the same thing, but the different plastics would contract at a different rate. And then like with the if you had the torso, you got two halves of the torso, and that's ABS, which is a styrene. And the arms and legs are going to be vinyl.
Yeah.
So they're going to be solid. They're not going to be hollow.
Yeah.
The body is a shell. So because it's hollow, it shrinks less.
Okay.
If it's solid, there's more mass, so it shrinks more. And then it had to be ABS and not just straight styrene, because evidently Dr. Science here, the molecules would migrate from one material to the other. So in effect, what would happen if you use straight styrene for the torso or the hard parts is that they would migrate and the arm wouldn't move anymore. It would be like glued.
That's like the big Boba Fett.
Yeah, I was gonna say
The wrists,
hands on
the
Boba
wrists
Fett.
get stuck.
Yeah.
It's because they did the arms in styrene,
Okay.
and the plasticizer in the vinyl attacks the styrene, and they lock up.
Yeah, and it almost looks like it's glued or whatever, but it's just the
And
natural
when they talk about shrink, the wax shrinks, and when they make a hard copy, when they make a mold and they make a hard copy, there's shrink there, and then so all that has to be accounted for, so that when you get down, that's why that Han Solo head is so weird. Is that I think they pantographed him up and then down or something, and it gets weird. But it's more complicated than just making a pretty sculpture. They're beautiful, but they're also really a piece of science. There is some science and all that stuff, and they have. That's why I admire sculptors so much when they're handed this thing and and they get the parts list and the materials list and have to calculate all that so that keep calculate or calipers to try and make sure that the shrink continues in the right.
Yeah.
It's really quite it's a whole different thing than just doing art, which he's really good at too, but it's real different. It has a bit of science and engineering all in it, so it's pretty cool. And like Baby Alive, when they did that, the sculpture had to be able to move and not get weird, because there's a mechanism in there that makes the mouth appear to be sucking and stuff. Yeah, so when you look at toys, they're way more complicated than they look from this part of. When you're on the shelf, it's all been done, and pretty cool. And like those patterns, just astounding.
I just realized, I just remembered one of the distinguishing factors of the Dagobah playset was that it was not done in a steel mold. It was actually a plated mold. There was an outfit in Philadelphia that would plate the mold around the wax in beryllium copper. So that then again you had a different situation. You didn't. They weren't casting. Casting something in hot metal. It was actually put in a plating solution, and then you just would wait for it to build up to enough thickness to withstand the molding pressure.
Speaking of Dagobah and butts, actually, I was wondering, do you know the little cylinder that goes inside R2-D2?
Yeah.
That holds him up to levitate, also known as the R2-D2 butt plug. So did you sculpt the butt plug for R2?
I wasn't responsible for the butt plug.
That was another department.
Yep.
Specialist.
Maybe pattern making. I don't know.
And would Kenner give you guys, like, once they went into production or whatever, like were you fairly, once you passed it off, like Jim, you said you were pretty much out of the picture and moving on to other projects. Did you get to see your final creations? Like, did they say, hey, here's a bunch of Rancors, great job?
A lot of times it depended on the engineer, but a lot of times they'd bring not in a box, but I mean they'd bring the part up, and here's what it looks like and everything. And a lot of times there'd be a part that would be applicable for other projects. And so whether it was like a shrink issue or whether it was a parting line issue or something. So you just, we'd all have our cubicles, we'd have a shelf, and you'd set it there, and you know, as a matter of fact, Bob Moore, again, this fellow that I worked with, he became a manager, and I remember one of the best things ever ever was a case where there was a tooling engineer who was famous for can't do. And, you know, they were working on a figure of some description that I can't remember. I was gone by then, but, you know, I remember Bob telling me. And he said that this guy was in checking on this figure that they were doing. I can't remember what the issue was, but he just, oh, geez, we can't do that. We can't do that. And Bob kept this copious file, or this copious pile of parts and toys in his desk drawer. And he just opens up the desk drawer, pulls out a piece from the previous year, and says, "We could last year." And I think he got his way.
All right. Well, let's give it up for Jim and Steven. And thank you guys very much. And yeah, we really appreciate you guys flying up here and coming up to see us.
It's been fun. Thanks.
Great. So we'll take about an hour break for lunch, and the room's still open if you do want to hang out here or grab something and bring it back. And otherwise, we'll see you around 1-ish for the next panel.